Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, January 21st. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. In the wake of devastating fires in Los Angeles County, false rumors online surrounding the fires became another battle.
You see something on social media that just looks crazy, it probably is. Don't share it. Don't fan the flames, so to speak.
In a few minutes, we try to unpack one online rumor with a Valley Water journalist. But first, today's headlines. Donald Trump's return to the White House has Republicans in California feeling excited. Some, like Michael Grayson, who's an oil and gas worker in Bakersfield, thinks it'll be good for business.
Hopefully he gets back to letting drilling happen, and then I know it probably won't happen in this state with our wonderful governor, but nonetheless, maybe get that pipeline going too, so we'll see what happens.
Grayson says recent election results show the state is catching up with Republican voters in the valley.
If you saw the map, this state was pretty red. There was not much blue. It's always up north and down south that seemed to fill in the blues, but there was a lot of red this time. I was very surprised, but I'm happy to see it.
Meanwhile, officials in the Fresno County city of Huron voted last week to declare the city a sanctuary for immigrants. The move is meant to offer some protection to people living in the city without legal status. Huron's mayor, Ray Leon, said in a social media post that the move aims to reduce fears of deportation among residents in his city. This follows the arrests of dozens of people by Border Patrol agents earlier this month, and it comes just as Donald Trump takes office with hardline immigration proposals. New reporting by KVPR has found bird flu does not affect all cattle equally. KVPR's Carrie Klein reports that as California moves to ban all exhibitions of dairy cows, it's a different story for beef cattle.
Dr. Annette Jones is California's state veterinarian. She says avian influenza has infected more than 700 of California's dairies. That's the vast majority. And how many non-dairy cattle have tested positive?
None that I'm aware of.
As for why, she says more research is needed. The virus appears to spread mostly in milk, but even lactating mothers and calves appear virus-free in non-dairy herds. Jones says it's not unheard of for specific animal breeds to respond differently to viruses.
Not only are we not getting positive samples, but we're also not seeing symptoms. So there does seem to be some resistance in those beef breeds.
More than 100 infected dairies in California have now been released from quarantine. Jones says she hopes that means the virus is on the downswing. For KVPR News, I'm Carrie Klein.
As the number of wildfires increase in California every year, schools have to mitigate the many long-term impacts associated with it. UC San Francisco psychiatry professor Dr. Alyssa Eppel is attempting to do just that. She's developed a class for college students to build climate resilience.
There is a real gap in how we educate our children, and it doesn't fit the social world that they're entering. And so there's a reflective process that goes on when we promote and teach about climate resilience. We are now adding components of psychological first aid to our class.
She advocates for a similar curriculum to be adopted for younger students after seeing the positive results from her class.
Join KVPR for an open house Thursday, January 23rd from 5 till 7 p.m. at the station's broadcast center in Clovis. Meet the team, enjoy a studio tour, and graze on hors d'oeuvres. RSVP at kvpr.org/open house.
And now to our main story. Wildfires have devastated parts of Los Angeles County in recent weeks. Hundreds of firefighters from across the state and abroad were deployed to fight the flames on the ground. But online, a flurry of misinformation about the fires also swirled almost uninterrupted. Altered images of the fires and plainly false information about what may have started them lit up social media. Combating the misinformation became a story in itself. Today, we're unpacking one of those rumors that took hold online, and we speak with Lois Henry. She's the editor of SJV Water, a news website that covers water in the San Joaquin Valley. SJV Water is also a partner newsroom with the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. Henry recently reported on a false rumor that billionaire business owners Stuart and Linda Resnick were, quote, hoarding a large percent of the state's water that could have helped fight the LA fires, so goes the accusation. The Resnicks run the Wonderful Company, maker of popular brands like Wonderful Pistachios and Fiji Water. The Wonderful Company employs about 3,000 people in the valley. I start by asking Lois, is it true that the Resnicks or their company can single-handedly control a large percentage of the state's water?
No, not at all. No. So this is where it gets confusing and complicated because it's California water. There is no such thing as like just some giant bathtub or water tower or whatever, where an individual can just tote that around and do what they want with it. All of this water is that it comes with their farmland. Most of it comes with their farmland. And so they bought acreage in Lost Hills Water District, which they have a lot of water. They have a lot of acreage out in Lost Hills. That's in western Kern County. That district contracts for water through the State Water Project. And so when they bought land, they pay assessments to that district in order to bring that water in and maintain that contract. So it doesn't go with Linda and Stuart Resnick. They can't just pick that water up and say, oh, now we want to, do whatever, build a golf course, 400 miles away, et cetera, whatever. That stuff can be done. I'm not saying it doesn't happen because there are some nefarious, uses of water, but for the most part, 99.9% of the time, the water has to be held and used within the contract under which it is arriving to this area. And there's also federal contracts, usually on the east side of the valley, and they have a very strict place of use clause in their contracts. So you can't just do what you want with this water.
I did want to mention the statement that the Wonderful Company put out. In a statement on the Wonderful Company's website, a spokesperson said, and I'll quote them, "It's hard to be surprised anymore by the disinformation and ignorance on social media. But in this case, the hamster wheel has spun to a new level of absurdity." They then go on to say that the company uses less than 1% of the state's water supply. So what exactly do they own? Again, there's that Kern Groundwater Bank Authority. I believe they have a more than 50% stake in that. But to your point, there are rules about where and how such water can be used.
Right. So it's hard for me to know unless I went through each one of their contracts that they have with each district. And beyond that, they may own some river water or ditch company water, et cetera. I know that they own some ditch water up in Tulare County that I did a story on a couple of years ago. So it's really hard to know, unless you work for the company, exactly how much water they, quote, own or control. And remember, those are two different, that's not a silly distinction. There's very different rules that you can control the water or you can own it. And there's very different ways that you can use it. So the last best guesstimate that we have, and this was actually confirmed by Stuart Resnick, the owner of Wonderful, to Mark Arax, when Mark wrote his book called The Dreamt Land in 2017, they basically used about 400,000 acre feet on their crops that year. Let's put this into context. 400,000 acre feet and 1 acre foot is 326,000 gallons, if you need to think about it that way. There's 400,000 acre feet. It's a lot of water. The state can hold 23.9 million acre feet in its reservoirs. So when you're looking at percentages that are coming out in these silly TikTok videos and other venues where it's, they own 60% of California's water, that is absolutely patently, provably untrue. Nobody owns 60% of California's, quote, water.
Yeah, and one might argue that social media, in its attempt to simplify things, misses a lot of these nuances. And I'm curious, from your point of view, tell us a little bit about some of the rumors on social media and why you think these rumors are brewing and the Resnicks are at the center of it. Do you think it's related at all to some people having sort of a growing distrust and dissatisfaction with the billionaire class?
Well, okay, so social media it loves to, build upon itself. And the more outrageous something seems, the more it gets traction. I mean, it's just the way it is. But in a case of catastrophe and crisis, which we're in right now with the LA fires, people are emotional and they want someone to blame. They do. And they had a situation in LA where fire hydrants either had low pressure, too low to really help the firefight, or ran out of water. And that is outrageous in most people's minds, right? So they want to find a villain. In that case, as LADWP has repeatedly said, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has repeatedly said, this is an unprecedented situation that took 4 times more water than they had resources for. So I don't know how that system can be designed to make sure that this never happens in the future. But again, the Resnicks had nothing to do with it. But I understand, people's desire to pin blame, to lash out, to sort of emote because they are so filled with terror right now. I get that, but this isn't the right avenue. I mean, if you want to ask me, I think it's building codes, but again, that's way more boring than putting out a TikTok that, shows rich people in a mansion.
Yeah, I think it might be worth explaining where LA actually gets its water from. Could you tell us that?
So 2 main sources in Los Angeles, and this kind of gets into an interest. I was having an interesting sort of philosophical conversation with somebody about this, because really LA shouldn't exist. It should not exist to the level that it exists at all. It never had the water. So one of its main sources is the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power under Mulholland, under his leadership, went up to the eastern Sierras, the Owens Valley, and essentially, many people feel, stole that water. Dried up Owens Lake, and all that water came down and is being used in Los Angeles specifically for, I think it was really to expand San Fernando Valley. There was a movie made out of it. It was called The Chinatown. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but that's one of its main sources, LADWP. That's like city limits of Los Angeles. That's what they service. And then the other big giant source is the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And they're sort of they get all their water, they contract through the State Water Project, through the California Aqueduct. So it comes down out of the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, through the California Aqueduct on the west side of the valley, up over the Grapevine. As they say, water follows money. And that is then sold. MWD sells it to all of the, smaller municipalities there. So they're sort of like a wholesaler.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Lois?
You see something on social media that just looks crazy. It probably is. Don't share it. Don't fan the flames, so to speak. Maybe a bad metaphor in this particular instance, but don't give it oxygen. Just, think before you share.
That was Lois Henry, editor and CEO of SJV Water. Thanks so much, Lois.
All right, thanks.
And that does it for today's show. If you ever have feedback or a story idea for the show, don't be afraid to reach out. Email us at podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.